Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something really big, really important as technology just keeps accelerating. All those thorny ethical questions that pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. The material we're looking at, it paints a picture of, incredible possibilities, but also some really deep questions about right and wrong as these technologies, these new powers emerge. We're covering a huge range today.
Right, from artificial intelligence and its decision-making.
To biotechnology, where
Yeah.
we're literally tinkering with life's code and even, heading out into space.
Exactly. So for everyone listening, our mission here is to kind of untangle this complex web. We've got sources covering AI challenges, think bias, think autonomous weapons, and the ethical puzzles in biotech, like gene editing and reproductive tech.
And that's just the start. We'll also hit autonomous vehicles, that classic trolley problem, but suddenly it's real cars on real roads. Plus, how social media and VR are changing us and the whole Internet of Things network.
And the super tiny world of nanotechnology, the mind-bending stuff like quantum computing, and our ambitions in space exploration. It's a lot, I know.
It really is.
But the goal is to pull out the really crucial ethical threads from all of this so you get the core issues without feeling totally buried. Okay, let's dive in. AI seems like the obvious starting point. We hear about it constantly, and the ethical side feels just as fast-paced, doesn't it?
It really does. And one of the biggest flags raised in the material is how easily bias, unfairness can get baked right into AI systems. It's fascinating and honestly a bit worrying how our own societal issues can get mirrored, even magnified by tech.
That Amazon hiring tool example really drove it home for me. It learned from historical hiring data, which, let's face it, was often skewed.
Right. Predominantly male candidates in that case.
Exactly. So the AI ended up discriminating against women. It just shows these systems are only as neutral as the data we feed them.
And the sources really break down where that bias comes from. You've got data bias. The training info just isn't representative. Then algorithmic bias, maybe flaws in the actual design, how it works. And of course, human bias, our own assumptions, maybe prejudices, sneaking into how we build or label things.
And the impact isn't just theoretical, is it? The sources show this affecting who gets interviews, loans, housing, even playing out in the justice system or reinforcing stereotypes. There was a diagram in one source showing how bias gets into the pipeline, which was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it lays it out clearly. But it's not all doom and gloom. The sources also point towards solutions. Things like using much more diverse data sets for training.
Makes sense.
Regular checks, like audits, on the algorithms themselves to catch bias. More transparency about how decisions are made is key too, plus having strong ethical guidelines for development.
Okay. So staying with AI, but shifting slightly. The job displacement issue, that's another huge ethical area. Feels like we're seeing bits of it already.
We definitely are. The sources mentioned self-checkout kiosks. That's a pretty clear example of automation reducing certain jobs.
With cashier roles, yeah.
But the worry is that as AI gets smarter, it could hit many more sectors. Manufacturing, transport, customer service, even areas like healthcare admin or finance.
And the potential knock-on effects.
Yeah.
They're massive, right? The material talks about higher unemployment, a bigger wealth gap, maybe a shrinking middle class.
Those are the economic concerns, yeah.
And socially. Could mean more unrest, more need for safety nets, a massive push for retraining people. One source had a graph projecting displacement. Must have been pretty sobering.
It is a serious potential consequence. The sources suggest ways to tackle it, though. Big investments in education and retraining, obviously.
Helping people adapt.
Exactly. Ideas like universal basic income are also floated as a potential buffer. Plus, policies to actually create new jobs and just generally strengthening social support.
Okay, let's switch to something that feels particularly heavy. Autonomous weapons. The whole idea of machines making life or death calls without a human, it's deeply unsettling.
It really is.
Yeah.
The information points out that several countries are actively developing these autonomous weapon systems, or AWS, and that raises immediate red flags about an AI-driven arms race.
The ethical questions feel gigantic, just the lack of direct human control and accountability. If an AWS makes a mistake, who's responsible? The programmer, the commander, the machine itself. It's murky.
And unpredictable, too. Plus, just the idea of weaponizing AI in the first place. I saw the campaign to stop killer robots mentioned that reflects the deep unease.
Yeah.
Now, some argue they could be more precise, maybe reduce friendly fire or civilian casualties.
I've heard that argument.
But the counter-arguments are powerful, eroding human morality in warfare, the risk of conflicts escalating uncontrollably, these things falling into the wrong hands. It's a lot. Those simulations or images mentioned must really bring it home.
So how do we even start to navigate this? The sources suggest international treaties, clear ethical rules for military AI, transparency in development, and just keeping the global conversation going.
Definitely. Okay, moving into biotechnology. Another field just bursting with potential and ethical tripwires. Genetic engineering is a big one, especially with tools like CRISPR. Curing diseases sounds amazing, but then you get the designer baby concern.
Right. That Chinese scientist who actually did edit babies' genes, that caused a huge uproar.
Understandably so.
The sources lay out the benefits, fixing genetic diseases, boosting immunity, but then the flip side, parents choosing traits like intelligence or appearance, that feels like a minefield. Plus unintended health effects down the line, worsening inequality. It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It really feels like one. And the distinction between editing somatic cells just affecting the individual versus germline editing.
Which gets passed on to future generations.
Exactly. That carries way more ethical weight. And regulations are all over the place globally. There's no consensus. That CRISPR diagram probably showed just how powerful this tech is.
So the path forward seems to involve really strict rules, lots of public debate, getting countries to agree on standards, and maybe focusing squarely on therapy, not enhancement.
That seems to be the consensus from the material, yeah. Then, still in biotech, you have reproductive technologies, IVF, surrogacy, things like that. They've helped so many people build families, but they bring their own ethical baggage.
The sources mention concerns about international surrogacy, where maybe vulnerable women are exploited.
Right, due to economic disparities.
And the whole idea of reproduction becoming commercialized. Plus, complexities around who counts as a parent, the child's well-being, fair access. It gets complicated fast.
And it keeps evolving. The sources bring up things like artificial wombs still futuristic, but raising even more questions about how we reproduce. Those images showing different family structures probably highlighted how complex it already is.
So again, it seems like robust regulations, clear ethical guidelines for clinics, support for everyone involved, and just public awareness are the key things suggested.
And then there's enhancement tech, using technology not just to heal, but to go beyond normal human limits. Gene editing for traits, advanced prosthetics, brain-computer interfaces. It pushes buttons about what it means to be human.
The sports doping example is familiar, but yeah, gene editing for strength or intelligence. Or plugging our brains into computers. The stakes feel way higher.
Much higher.
Is it fair? Will only the rich get enhanced, creating a superhuman class? What about authenticity, safety? Where's the line? The sources mention transhumanism, this idea of actively embracing tech to overcome biology. Those images of enhancements must have been pretty striking.
They really highlight the possibilities and the potential divides. The sources stress needing open public dialogue, ethical frameworks to guide us, careful oversight, and always keeping human dignity front and center.
Okay, let's steer towards autonomous vehicles now. And right away, we hit that classic ethical puzzle, the trolley problem, but for real.
Exactly. The sources frame it perfectly.
Yeah.
An AV is in an unavoidable crash situation. How does it choose? Hit, say, multiple pedestrians, or swerve and hit just one, or maybe risk the passenger.
And all those ethical theories, utilitarianism, greatest good, deontology, follow the rules, egalitarianism, equal harm, they all crash into this, don't they?
They do.
How do you program it? Prioritize passengers, pedestrians? What about kids versus adults? And do different cultures view this differently? That visual of the AV trolley problem must have really hit home.
It crystallizes the dilemma. The sources suggest we need broad public discussion to figure out societal preferences, clear ethical guidelines for the manufacturers programming these things, and strong regulations. Transparency in the programming is vital, too.
And then there's the whole safety and liability mess. If an AV crashes, who pays? Who's responsible? It's not like blaming a human driver.
No, it's much trickier. The sources mention accidents that have already happened, raising these questions urgently. They also explain the SAE levels of automation from driver assist to fully driverless, which matters hugely for liability.
Right, because it depends how much control the driver or system had.
Exactly. Is it the manufacturer?
The owner?
A passenger?
Yeah.
Software coder? Lots of possibility.
So we clearly need new insurance models, updated laws, and data recording seems absolutely critical, the black box for cars, essentially. That diagram showing autonomy levels and liability probably helped clarify.
Definitely. The sources call for clear legal frameworks for AV accidents, insurance reform, data standards so we know what happened, and industry collaboration to sort it out.
And like AI, AVs bring up the job displacement issue again, especially for drivers.
Yes, big time. The sources focus on trucking self-driving trucks could massively disrupt that industry.
But also taxis, ride-sharing, delivery drivers, maybe even bus drivers eventually.
Right. The economic fallout could be huge in communities reliant on those jobs. Unemployment, retraining needs.
Yeah.
It's a major social challenge.
Although the sources probably mention potential upsides too, like efficiency, maybe new jobs in AV maintenance or logistics.
They do acknowledge potential benefits and new job creation, but the scale of disruption in traditional roles is the main concern. That job loss projection graph likely highlighted this.
So the suggested responses sound familiar. Workforce retraining, trying to create new jobs, better safety nets, maybe a slower rollout to let people adapt.
Pretty much, yes. A combination of strategies seems necessary.
Okay, let's shift to the digital world. Social media and virtual reality. Privacy and data exploitation. That feels like ground zero.
It really does. The sources hammer home how much personal data these platforms collect and how it's used. Targeted ads, detailed profiling, even political influence, like with Cambridge Analytica.
It's staggering what they gather. Demographics, interests, behavior, connections, and the privacy worries are huge. Lack of transparency, feeling like you have no control, data breaches.
In the exploitation side, it's not just ads, it's shaping opinions, selling data. The sources mentioned surveillance capitalism. That diagram showing data flows probably looked pretty complex.
Yeah.
So the push is for stronger regulations like GDPR in Europe, giving users more control, more transparency and accountability from platforms, maybe even exploring different business models, not totally reliant on data harvesting.
Then there's the mental health angle. Social media and VR seem like a double-edged sword there.
Absolutely. The sources note the good connection, support groups, information access, even VR for therapy, like exposure therapy.
Right.
But also the bad addiction, cyberbullying, endless social comparison, FOMO, isolation, links to anxiety and depression, especially in younger people. And VR's immersion adds another layer. Those infographics balancing pros and cons were likely quite revealing.
So the focus needs to be on promoting responsible use, designing platforms for well-being, not just engagement, providing mental health support, and just more research on the long-term effects.
And finally, in this space, there's the blurring of reality itself. As VR gets more convincing, what does that do to our sense of what's real?
The whole metaverse concept really throws us into relief, doesn't it?
It does. The sources talk about immersion and presence in VR, how real it can feel. That raises philosophical questions. What is real? What's the relationship between physical and virtual selves? How does it change us?
And the psychological effects. Altered perception, distorted views, plus social impacts, changing interactions, relationships, and the ethics of pure escapism or harmful virtual worlds. Those VR simulations must have looked incredibly real.
They likely did. The sources suggest promoting media literacy, helping people navigate this ethical design for VR, more research on long-term effects, and just fostering critical thinking about it all.
Okay, let's navigate into the Internet of Things, IoT. All these connected devices. Privacy and surveillance seem like the immediate red flags again.
For sure. The sources point out the sheer volume of data habits, preferences, movements collected by everything from smart speakers to thermostats. The classic example is smart speakers potentially listening in.
It feels creepy.
It does. And the risks are broad. Unauthorized access, data used for hyper-targeted ads or profiling, potential for government surveillance or social control, often with little transparency or user control. It feeds fears of a surveillance society. That data flow diagram for IoT must have shown connections everywhere. So the call is for stronger IoT-specific privacy rules, minimizing data collection, data minimization, giving users real control and consent options, baking privacy in from the start, privacy by design, and transparency from the companies involved.
And security. If these devices are collecting data but aren't secure, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
A huge issue. The sources use the Mirai botnet attack, where hacked IoT devices like cameras were used for massive denial of service attacks, as a prime example. Weak passwords connecting to insecure home networks, just the sheer number of devices, it creates massive vulnerability. Consequences range from data theft to disrupting critical infrastructure, even physical harm if things like medical devices are hacked. And there aren't always clear security standards. That vulnerability diagram was probably quite worrying.
So the solutions seem to be clear security standards and regulations, security by design, strong passwords, encryption, updates, regular testing, user education about securing their devices, and industry working together on it.
Exactly. And one more thing with IoT algorithmic bias again. Just because it's a thing doesn't mean it's neutral.
Right. The sources mention facial recognition in smart doorbells, for example, potentially working less well for certain groups.
Precisely. Bias can come from the training data, the algorithm design, even how or where the device is deployed. This could lead to discrimination in accessing smart city services or inaccurate health data from wearables, things like that.
Yeah.
That diagram on IoT bias likely showed how it can sneak in.
So the mitigation strategies are similar to AI bias. Diverse data, audits, transparency, ethical guidelines for development in the IoT space.
Correct. It's a recurring theme.
Okay, shrinking down now to nanotechnology. Given how tiny these materials are, safety and toxicity seem like the first big question marks.
They really are. The sources explain that nanomaterials have unique properties because of their size, which is great for applications, but also means they might interact with our bodies and the environment in unexpected ways.
Like getting into places they shouldn't.
Potentially, yeah. Penetrating biological barriers, showing toxicity in lab studies may be accumulating over time. The example of nanoparticles in sunscreen is one people might know. It raises questions even in everyday products.
And the environmental side. Contaminating soil or water. Affecting wildlife.
Those are major concerns. And because it's relatively new, the long-term effects aren't fully understood and regulations are still developing. Those images of nanobio interactions probably illustrated the uncertainty.
So the approach needs to be cautious. Thorough safety testing, good risk assessment, regulation, and aiming for green nanotechnology environmentally friendly approaches.
That seems to be the consensus. And connected to that is the broader environmental impact, potential contamination, how these materials move through ecosystems.
The sources mention agriculture nanoparticles in fertilizers or pesticides affecting soil and water.
Exactly, or accumulating in the food chain. We need to look the whole life cycle of these materials. More research is definitely needed here. Those diagrams of environmental pathways are probably quite complex.
So sustainable design, monitoring, proper waste management, international collaborations seem key.
Yes, and like many powerful techs, there's the misuse potential, specifically weaponization.
Using nanotechnology for weapons, that sounds worrying.
It is. The sources express concern about nano-enhanced explosives, super-sensitive sensors for spying, even hypothetical nanobots for attacks. It could change warfare significantly.
The ethical issues seem huge: new WMD potential, blurring lines in war laws, increasing conflict risk.
All valid concerns. And there aren't specific international treaties covering nanoweapons yet. Those illustrations of military uses were likely quite sobering.
So mitigation seems to point towards treaties, export controls on sensitive nanostuff, ethical guidelines for research, and public awareness.
That covers the main strategies mentioned.
All right, let's jump to the really cutting edge. Quantum computing. Security seems to be the first major ethical hurdle.
Absolutely. The big fear, explained in the sources, is that quantum computers could eventually break most of the encryption we rely on today.
Like for banking, secure communications, government secrets, everything.
Potentially, yes. Concepts like quantum supremacy and Shor's algorithm show the theoretical power. It creates an urgent need for post-quantum cryptography encryption that can resist quantum attacks. This whole quantum threat is a major driver of research. That diagram showing quantum-breaking encryption must have been stark.
Very.
So the focus is on massive investment in developing and deploying post-quantum crypto, planning the transition, international collaboration on standards, and just upgrading security protocols across the board.
But then there's accessibility. This tech sounds incredibly expensive and complex. Is there a risk of a quantum divide?
That's a huge concern raised in the sources. Right now, it's mostly huge corporations and governments developing it. The cost, the need for specialized skills, it could easily lead to a situation where only a few have access to this immense power, worsening inequality. That graph showing the potential divide probably made the point visually.
So solutions look like investing in education to create more quantum experts, open source initiatives maybe, public funding to spread the benefits, and international collaboration again to share knowledge.
Those are the main avenues suggested. And finally, for quantum, there's the misuse potential beyond breaking codes.
Like what?
Well, the sources mention using that immense power for designing new weapons, manipulating financial markets, creating incredibly powerful surveillance tools. It's a classic dual-use technology.
Meaning it has peaceful and harmful applications.
Exactly. And again, international regulations haven't really caught up yet. Those illustrations of potential misuses were likely quite speculative but concerning.
So similar themes for mitigation. International agreements, export controls, ethical guidelines, strong security around the machines themselves.
That sums it up well.
Okay, our final frontier for today, space exploration technologies. As we go further out, planetary protection seems like a primary ethical duty.
It really is. The sources stress the risk of contamination, us bringing Earth microbes to Mars or elsewhere, forward contamination, or potentially bringing unknown extraterrestrial life back here, backward contamination.
Which could be catastrophic.
Potentially. NASA and ESA have protocols, but as missions become more complex, especially with humans involved, the risks increase. Those images of pristine Martian landscapes versus potentially contaminated landers probably highlighted the issue.
So it's about responsibility, right? Protecting other worlds, even seemingly lifeless ones. Balancing science with caution.
That's the core ethical tension. It means stringent sterilization, advanced containment, international cooperation on protocols, and clear ethical frameworks for interacting with other worlds.
Then there's resource exploitation, mining asteroids, the moon. Sounds like science fiction, but companies are working on it.
They are. And the sources dive into the ethics. There could be valuable minerals, water ice. But who owns it? How is it shared? What are the environmental impacts on these bodies? Is it sustainable?
The Outer Space Treaty is pretty vague on ownership, isn't it?
It mainly forbids national appropriation, but not necessarily private extraction. It's a legal gray area. Those asteroid mining illustrations likely looked cool, but raised big questions.
So we need new international agreements on space resources, sustainable practices, equitable sharing, and ethical guidelines for commercial space activities.
That seems essential. And finally, the ultimate goal for some, colonization. Permanent human settlements beyond Earth.
Which opens up the biggest ethical can of worms, maybe.
Quite possibly. The sources touch on the motivations, species, survival, knowledge, resources, but also the enormous challenges. Psychological strain, social structures in isolated colonies, potential for new inequalities, the ethics of terraforming other planets, and the huge question, who gets to go? Who decides? It forces us to think about humanity's long-term future. Those artistic visions of colonies are inspiring, but also daunting.
Absolutely. The path forward seems to require massive interdisciplinary thinking, science, ethics, sociology, law, plus public debate, strong ethical frameworks for off-world living, and international cooperation to make sure it's done responsibly.
It's crucial to remember, as the sources really emphasize, these technologies don't live in neat little boxes. They intersect, combine, and often amplify each other's ethical challenges.
Right. The sources gave great examples. AI plus biotech. Amazing personalized medicine, maybe, but also biased healthcare AI or designer babies.
Or nanotech plus AI, targeted drug delivery, nanobots, fantastic.
Yeah.
But also nanosurveillance or nanoweapons.
Quantum plus AI, supercharging AI development, maybe, but also AI breaking codes or powering autonomous weapons.
Social media plus VR, incredibly immersive virtual worlds, but deeper issues of identity, privacy, addiction, reality blurring.
And IoT plus AI, smart homes, smart cities. But amplifying all those privacy, security, and bias concerns we talked about, just on a massive scale. It's all connected.
It truly is. Which means navigating this ethical frontier needs a joined-up approach, as the sources conclude. We need collaboration.
The sources list key steps. Interdisciplinary work, getting ethicists, social scientists, engineers, policymakers all talking. Developing ethical frameworks, but ones that are flexible, that can adapt.
Crucially, public engagement. Making sure tech development aligns with what society actually wants and values.
Education and awareness are vital too, obviously. And then robust regulation and governance, maybe new laws, standards, oversight bodies.
Plus this idea of responsible innovation, building ethics from the start, not tacking it on later. International cooperation is non-negotiable for global tech. And finally, just continuous evaluation. Keep researching the impacts, keep adapting the rules as we learn more.
It's definitely clear the ethics around all this emerging tech are complex, interconnected, and need ongoing serious attention.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you, the listener, to mull over. With technology advancing so rapidly across all these fronts, AI, bio, nano, quantum space, and with everything so interconnected, what do you think is the single most pressing ethical challenge cutting across all these domains that really demands our immediate collective focus? Something to think about.